Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, lawmakers prepare for a historic legislative session. What will be the major topics? Will there be a sleeper issue that will change the nature of the session? And with Utah weighing its own major reforms, how will national politics trickle down to affect the debate? Federal lawmakers work to avoid a government shutdown. Will they find a solution on immigration reform? How do Utahns feel about the issue? And with all eyes on Mitt Romney, when and how will he announce his candidacy for the U.S. Senate?
Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Brian King, Democratic State Representative, Mara Carabello, president of the Exoro Group, and Todd Weiler, Republican State Senator. So glad to have you all here today, and there is a lot to talk about happening in Washington, D.C. and in the state of Utah. So let's start with the impacts of what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now, and we're going to start with you, Representative. A shutdown of the government is looming for tonight, this very night, in a few hours at midnight. Potentially, the government could shut down. Give us a little bit of an understanding as to what brought us to this point.
Well, the problem is we've been operating at the federal government now for literally years on continuing resolutions for keeping the budget in line and having the money to fund government going forward. That's a problem. It's been a problem for years. But the reality is that you've got the Republicans now in charge of both the Senate and the House, as well as the White House, of course. And so I think it's hard there's extra pressure on the Republicans to get something done in terms of a budget in place that allows the government to stay open. So that's the challenge from my perspective.
And it's interesting, the Democrats had no problem operating under continuing resolution after continuing resolution under Obama. But now that Trump's in the White House and the Republicans have said, we'll extend SHIP funding for 6 years, they're like, oh, no, we can't have a continuing resolution unless we fund DACA. And I've never seen the Democrats put illegal children over American citizen children, and I think it's shameful.
Okay, let's take a break on that point, because I want to show a graphic. The most recent tweet from President Trump about this very issue. He said, government funding bill passed last night in the House of Representatives. Now Democrats are needed if it is to pass the Senate. But they want illegal immigration and weak borders. Shutdown coming? We need more Republican victories in 2018. Now, that's interesting to your point right here. And Mara, take a second on this. Has it really been set up so it's you take care of the kids that need health insurance or the DACA students?
So it's certainly been set up that gamesmanship is being used at most when they hit deadlines. And so this has become a critical point. The American public sees these points and loses confidence in the decision making because we're now mostly talking, the insiders talk about who's going to win and who's going to lose from the PR perspective, the momentum perspective, and what's next.
But Congress does nothing without an artificial deadline. And the fact of the matter is, I support DACA. But there's no reason why we can't get CHIP funded today and get DACA done in 4 weeks.
So why did this happen then? Because we have a House bill that has come out that's now before the Senate. They did not include anything on DACA, right? They did do something for CHIP. Why was that choice made then?
Because the president has tied DACA to funding for the wall.
Right. I mean, what we're talking about here is initially President Trump said, I'm leaving it to you congressional leaders to come up with something, and I'll sign anything that you sign off on. Well, they do come up with something, and he says, I'm not signing off on that because it doesn't, from his political perspective, I think, satisfy the campaign promises he made about building the wall. And that's the challenge, I think, is that you have some disconnect between congressional leadership and what Donald Trump wants to have happen.
But, you know, let's be honest here. The Democrats in the Senate released a press release last night gleefully saying that they have enough votes to shut down the government. This is a Democratic shutdown with John McCain out, with Roy Moore's seat, gone to the Democrats, this budget will not pass, with this extension will not pass without the Democrats, and they are dancing on the grave saying that they've got the votes to kill it. This shutdown is on the Democrats because they want to fund illegal children over American children, poor children who are going to lose their health insurance.
Okay, go ahead, it's the minority. I mean, that's the fun part, right? Let's just say political fun, because that's a powerful piece of rhetoric. But I also say you can't control the White House and the Senate and the House and say that the minority is controlling what we do and it's their fault.
Well, and what Todd illustrates is the importance of how strongly people involved in this debate feel the need to look at the other side and say, this is your fault, this is your fault, because we all know, and I think it's true, that the American people will not look kindly on the party that they think is most responsible for the shutdown. So you have the argument from Senator Weiler saying, hey, it's the Democrats' fault. But the reality is, and of course I think it's the Republicans' fault. I'm a Democrat. I'll plead to being partisan on this issue. But the reality is that the Republicans do control both the House and the Senate, as well as the White House. I think if you had a more effective leader in the form of the President of the United States who brought people together, you would have the likelihood of a shutdown decreased substantially. The problem really here in my mind is Donald Trump is a very ineffective leader and negotiator.
When the Republicans shut down the government in 2013, I blame the Republicans. When the Democrats do it today, I'm blaming the Democrats.
So does that really matter? Do you think that's the case, Mara? Because 2013 was the last time, and it lasted for like 16 days.
Right.
The government shut down. Would you say the Republicans took the blame for that one? And if so, were there really any ramifications for it?
I'm going to say that this continues to perpetuate the low viability and trust numbers of the Congress with the Americans, because it's pretty transparently a blame game on both sides. And both the senator and representative are right in that it switches. The sides switch depending on it.
So let me ask, regardless of who is to blame, Representative, why does anyone in Utah really care?
Well, immediately, I don't know that there's a reason to care. I mean, in other words, contrary to what we did in 2013, there has been provision made to keep national parks open, for example. Now, that's what really hurt Utah immediately in 2013, was that it shut down the national parks, and it did have a huge impact on our economy. So much so that we legislatively and the state leaders went in and said, hey, we're going to make arrangements to keep those things open. I don't think that that's going to happen to the same degree this time. And likewise, you're going to have continuing essential operations occur. If you go for more than a week or two and people's paychecks stop, that's when you're going to have some ramifications.
Right.
But let's not pretend this is not a political move by the Democrats. There's 800,000 children affected by DACA. They see all of them as future Democratic voters. And for them to throw the poor children that need this CHIP funding under the bus for DACA, it is shameful. And I'm sticking to that rhetoric.
So Mara, just one last thing on this. So we have about 10,500 DACA kids in the state of Utah. What is the implication of them not being included in this bill in your mind?
So I think that there are huge ramifications for DACA citizens, or residents, I should say. And I think there's huge ramifications for CHIP. And I think that there should be shame on both sides that these are the groups that they're using. And it's because we all care about both of these groups. And there are real ramifications for these people. They're living, they're working, they're going to school here.
The Democrats cared about CHIP until they didn't. Orrin Hatch promised if we get this tax cut through, we'll get CHIP extended. And he did that on December 22nd. But now it's going to run out, and the Democrats are saying, fine, let CHIP run out because DACA is more important.
It's remarkable to me, Jason, the degree to which people who are in charge get desperate when it's clear that they're failing. They're failing in the form of inadequate leadership from President Trump, an example of moral leadership, an example of political leadership, an example of negotiating skills, as well as Senator McConnell and Representative Ryan, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. These folks are failing, and yet you have, when that happens and there is a looming political consequence for that, you have the kind of rhetoric that we hear from my good friend, and he is my good friend, Senator Weiler, but on this he's just completely out of step.
So I would ask on the eve, I'm just going to jump in and move it a little to your question about Utah. I mean, one of the things I would say is on the eve of the session, which starts on Monday, I have full confidence that our Senate and our House will act with more discord and look more at the analysis and the reason of the issues and not the politic of the issue.
And I will say on this, Todd and I get along very well personally. We have our political differences, but the fact is, what Mara just said is absolutely true. You've got a great working relationship between the D's and the R's, generally speaking, on the Hill at the Utah State Legislature. We get a lot done. Washington, D.C. could take a lot of lessons in getting things done on a bipartisan basis by looking at the Utah State Legislature.
I couldn't agree more. And Brian's always right when he agrees with me.
That is great. Well, you did get into a little bit of an issue this week, though, Representative, when we start talking about tax increases in the state. Yeah. That is something that's on the agenda, potentially. Right. We have an initiative out there, Our Schools Now, which aims to raise the income tax 0.45%. About $700 million for public education. And just this week, you kind of got into it on whether or not that track was right or whether or not Utahns are in favor of this. Give us your analysis of that.
Well, look, this is an education funding issue that we've been talking about in the legislature for literally decades. In the mid-90s, we changed over in a way that diluted the amount of money that goes to public education by saying that higher education could share in the education fund.
The voters diluted it.
That's right. Well, the legislature took the initiative on that.
And the voters approved it.
And the voters approved it. That was a mistake, I think. And I think most people in hindsight think of it as a mistake. I think many of my Republican colleagues think it was a mistake. The reality, though, is that as time has revealed that we're lacking money in the education fund, and for public education specifically, we need to do something. I think Our Schools Now is a step in the right direction. It's a painful step, but it's a measure of the degree to which the legislature hasn't had the political will, hasn't shown the political will to do a difficult thing in investing in our children. We talk about investing in our infrastructure. The most important infrastructure we have in this state is the children of the state of Utah. I want to see more money going to public ed.
My biggest issue with Our Schools Now, I want to see more money, but I think it needs to be attached to measurable metrics. I think there needs to be some accountability. This feels a little bit to me like throwing a bunch of money against the wall and hoping some of it sticks. When you talk about $715 million, it's only $607 million to K through 12 because 15% goes to higher ed, like University of Utah and Weber State and other schools. We have added $800 million in new money to K through 12 in the last 3 years, and nobody even notices a difference. And this, if Our Schools Now passes in November, it's going to move us from 51st in per pupil funding all the way up to 49th in per pupil funding. And we're still going to be hearing 2 years from now how Utah, the legislature doesn't care about kids and everything else. So it's not a magic fix. The money will go to the schools directly, and they'll have to come up with a plan. I think the community council has to be approved by the school boards, but only 25% of that money could be used to increase teacher salaries. And so the rest, it could be for teachers' aides or other things. But if we're going to throw that much money, I'd like to have some metrics where we can measure success.
Mara, give us some kind of historical perspective on this. How do Utahns feel about tax increases, I guess generally, but does it change much of the analysis when it's really for the students?
I think let's talk about education. Education has always had a disparity between action and our words. Every poll, we always say education's our number one issue. We always say it's the most important. And then we've had a lack of follow through or a lack of clarity or planning on the actual giving side. It's a complex system. There are many players. Overall, one thing I think that is a misnomer in Utah is that conservatives don't vote for taxes. What we find with conservatives are they need to have an assurance, this is what the senator's talking about, that the money goes where it says it will go. I mean, that's the big hang up usually with conservatives. It's actually not, you find if you dig deeper into polling, it's not the tax itself, it's the lack of confidence that the money will get spent wisely. So on education, you're seeing this same amount of rhetoric. I will say universally there are principles in government and principles in behavior that say if you value something, the way to show it is to fund it. That the action on that matters. There has been great funding for this. Historically, though, conservatives will vote to increase their taxes if they feel like the case for support is strong enough that it'll make a difference.
But there's going to be 2 tax increases probably on the November ballot because there's also a Medicaid expansion initiative that's gaining steam. I don't see Utah voters voting to raise their taxes twice on the same ballot. So those 2, I think, are in direct competition with one another.
See that being true?
Well, I think that people have to evaluate what's most important to them. Those are 2, if they both get on the ballot, those are 2 worthy initiatives in my mind. But the senator's right in saying, it sets it up as a little bit of competition that may be to the detriment of both.
Well, that's a very interesting point, too, because we have 6 initiatives.
We do.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Two are really the two sides of the same coin. So there's 4 initiatives, and then
Count My Vote.
Count My Vote and Keep My Vote, which are the polar opposites of one another.
They are the polar opposites. We've talked about that on the show a little bit. Representative, why so many initiatives? And as a legislator, does this make you kind of bugged a little bit?
It bugs me. It bugs me because I think it's a manifestation of the fact that people are frustrated with us up at the legislature on some very important issues that they've tried to get movement on, and we haven't been successful. I favor, with the exception of the 2 competing Count My Vote initiatives, I'm in favor of the primary Count My Vote initiative, and I'm in favor of the other initiatives, some more strongly than others. I think better boundaries, redistricting, very important and a very worthwhile initiative. Of course, I feel the same way about Medicaid expansion in our schools now, and medical marijuana I think is a little more difficult because the medical professionals tell us we're not really that comfortable with the idea of medicinal marijuana. But you know, I think that the frustrating thing, to get to your point, is the people of the state of Utah want us to do things at the legislature that we just don't follow through on and do in an effective way from their perspective. We'll see in the end whether, number 1, the initiatives get on the ballot at all, and number 2, if they get on the ballot, whether they pass. But I'm very concerned about that Our Schools Now initiative, because if that gets on the ballot and fails, Jason, you're going to have a very hard time getting legislators in the future, the next 5 or 10 years, to be very proactive or aggressive about funding public ed.
Yeah, Mara, this is to your good point about if you believe in it, you fund it, right? But if this does not get on the ballot, or if it does and it fails, is every legislature going forward saying, we care about it, but I'm going to be okay if I fund other things first?
It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough if the citizens, if they can hide, or not hide, but defer to the citizens' action on it, I think, specifically in education.
When these initiatives, in November, the people have spoken, and they may have spoken in a way different than some people think they're going to speak. I don't know what's going to happen. So I think there's one reason why we have 6 initiatives, and we haven't had this before, that's being overlooked, and that is when the legislature created the dual path with Senate Bill 54, we had companies like Gather that organized in Utah, and now everybody knows you can get this many signatures in this much time, just write a check for this much money. We've never had that available before.
So let me disagree a little bit. I have done ballot measures in Utah since the late 80s, and I will just tell you, if anybody thinks that it's an easy task or you do it to make a point, the amount of effort, the onus, the bar that is set in Utah is equal to none. And so be it. But a couple things about initiatives that are important. No one in their right mind does it as the first means of advocacy. No one does. And so by the time it's made it to that point, there are a chorus of people who believe in something that they don't think is getting action. The other is the financial lift, the people lift, and these are real people. One of the things I am struck by in these groups is that I'm not seeing just a line of professionals that are circulating. And so I will say I do think it's created a microeconomic industry in politics, but there is nothing easy about a ballot measure. And the third thing is I would just remind us all that it's constitutionally protected. So we look to our founding documents to say where good government is, and Utah's founding documents, Utah is one of a few states that constitutionally protects this right. So there's nothing easy about it. You'll see that I think all of us are taking odds that who knows who, but I doubt all will get on.
Yeah.
It's a hard reach. But for those who put forth that you do a ballot measure to make a point has
Or
not
send a message.
has not done the heavy lifting.
Easier. 2 years ago this week, I was collecting signatures for my reelection. Gather collected 2,000 signatures in Bountiful for me in 2 days.
So I will tell you, it is much easier for candidates.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at making that as easy for issues as you've all made it for yourselves to get on the ballot, I would love to see that equity.
And Mara's point is a good one in the sense that over time, the legislature has incrementally made it more difficult to get these initiatives on the ballot.
Technology is making it easier. One other point, Jason, medical marijuana. I support medical marijuana. I voted for a final Senate version 2 years ago. But it's not just a yes or no, it's a how. And the how for me is we need Congress to act. We need to dispense it in a pill through a pharmacy, just like anything else. This medical marijuana initiative allows some people to grow it at home, decriminalizes all marijuana possession, and allows full leaf. It allows people to drive around in their cars with baggies full of marijuana. I can't vote for this, even though I want medical marijuana. So I hope people will read the 30 pages of these petitions, and there's 6 of them. But my fear is people are going to say, I don't want to do all this homework. I'm just here to vote for Mitt Romney. I'm going to vote no on everything else or leave them blank.
Okay.
There's a real risk there with 6 initiatives. And there will be constitutional amendments on top of those.
Yeah,
he's assuming a fact, not an evidence, quite yet, which is Mitt Romney's going to be on the ticket.
Oh,
No, I think he is going to be on the
He'll
ticket.
announce
I
next
think
week.
you will.
Yeah.
Oh, announcement next week?
Yes.
Okay, we have the prediction now.
Yeah.
No, I think he's going to be on the ticket, and I think it's going to be tough to beat Mitt Romney. I mean, there's already been polling that says that when you match up Mitt Romney against Jenny Wilson, she's down by
51 points is the last poll.
Yeah, and a large part that is reflecting the huge name recognition that Mitt Romney has, and of course he's respected in Utah. It's going to be very difficult for anyone to knock off Mitt Romney in running for the U.S. Senate.
So if you don't mind, I'm just even going to skip the part where Mitt Romney is going to be on and win, because I think he will be on, and I have no doubts that he'll win. But I'm sort of very excited about who he could be. In my mind, what keeps happening, at least to me, is I'm electing these people to go to Washington, and when they get there, they make the decision to be good soldiers in the army of the Republican and Democratic fight. And I sort of am not interested. I don't want that anymore. I want Mitt Romney has circumstances around him, name recognition, former posts he's held, an overwhelming victory in Utah when he comes in, and financial independence, platforms. I hope he chooses to be a general, a leader for constituents and American values, because the army of the Republicans and the Democrats are not interesting to me anymore for representatives.
Well, does he come in at a time when it's not likely he's there for a really long time?
Right.
A couple of terms, maybe.
Yeah, maybe
He's
that.
71 years old. I mean, he'll be a freshman in a body that usually rewards seniority. But I was at the Salt Lake Chamber event at the Salt Lake City Creek Marriott on Tuesday, and Mitt gave a long speech. And there's 2 things that really stuck out to me. Number one, he kind of side-handed praised the Trump tax cuts, said that's not how I would have done it, but it will help the economy. And number 2, he was talking about merit-based immigration, which is a Trump administration term. I saw a very different Mitt Romney than I saw 6 years ago. And for those of my suspicion a month ago was he wanted to get in the Senate and be the new John McCain and be pushing back. But what I saw on Tuesday was, we're going to work for Trump's agenda.
Yeah, no, this is the reality of today's Republican Party. You like it or not, it's the reality, and that is they have fallen in line between Donald J. Trump. They're with him, and they support him. Now, that doesn't preclude a guy like Jeff Flake, in order to, for whatever reason, either a cynical reason or a good reason, from voicing his concerns. But look at how Jeff Flake votes. He votes right with Donald Trump every time. The same is true with Lindsey Graham, for the most part. The same is true with John McCain. And that's what troubles me, is that, to get to Mara's point, what you have is, although there's some independence of thought and some comments that don't fall right in line with Trump, they're carrying out his agenda in Washington, D.C.
And when Bill Clinton was having sex with Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office, Democrats fell in line behind him.
Well, is Mitt Romney, though, is he going to just fall in line, you think?
I think he will. I think he will.
Mara?
I agree. I agree with the senator's take on Romney's speech this week, but I will say he is a unique man, and I hope he rises to the challenge.
Okay, very good. Now, on Monday, the legislature goes into session. You all get to do...
Is it this Monday?
It is. We're all watching. All right, so I want to talk for just a moment about what is about to come. We've talked about a couple of big issues. Representative, one of those sleeper issues that's going to impact the state that you're seeing that will really take a stage during the session.
Well, I don't know about a sleeper issue, but one of the things that comes to the forefront in every session that we're constitutionally required to do is put together a budget. And our priorities are reflected in that budget. If you really want to know what any legislative body thinks is important, look at their funding, how they fund things, and the budget. I think one sleeper issue that could come up, though, in connection with that is some tax increases associated with how we fund transportation. The governor's office and some of our legislative leaders have expressed concern about the fact that we don't have transportation funds coming from the users of transportation, which traditionally has been the gas tax, the fuel tax, and that it's too low. Now, we have in the past increased or tinkered with the fuel tax to increase revenue, but there's still some strong feeling on the part of many people that we need to do more with that so that we don't divert funds out of the general fund that we use those general funds that are much more needed in other areas as opposed to transportation.
I think a sleeper issue is the Me Too. Me Too is coming to the Utah legislature next week. You're going to see a lot of Me Too type bills. There's going to be a bill to say that lobbyists, registered lobbyists, are going to have to undergo sexual harassment training at the Capitol, like legislators already do and have for years. You're going to see a lot of emphasis on women's issues. Democratic Representative Angela Romero and I have been working for 8 months on a major revamp of our protective order statute. There's going to be a lot of women-focused issues this session.
I agree. One thing I'm watching for behind the scenes, so maybe not categorized as a sleeper issue, is that in the majority party, the Speaker of the House has said he is not going to run again, and the Senate President has said he may not go for the Senate presidency again.
But he is running for re-election.
Right, that he would be in the body. So that creates some space for inside the caucus, taking over leadership roles and getting support. And I have found, in usually a positive way, but in a way that it's worth the citizens watching, that dynamic of also deciding who the next leader is comes into impact with the session that's in flux. So I think jockeying, if you will, for leadership in those caucuses, in those Republican caucuses, is actually going to greatly affect the issues that ended up being making it across the finish line. So I'm watching
and the ones to watch in the House are Brad Wilson and Francis Gibson. One of those two will likely be the next speaker. And in the Senate, if Niederhauser doesn't run for re-election, it'll probably be Stuart Adams or Kurt Bramble. So those are the ones to watch.
Well, that's interesting. So do you agree with this? It's a very interesting observation that maybe the difficult issues wait if they're jockeying.
This is a very much an insider baseball thing, in the sense that the nuances that Mara and Senator Wiley are referring to are there, and they have an impact. I think that one of the things that impacts our discussion in terms of tax policy, for example, we've been talking about tax reform, and there have been some people saying we need to do tax reform on the state level just like they did on the federal level. Personally, I don't think that's likely this year for a couple of reasons. One is there's some uncertainty about who's going to be jockeying for a position that creates a native sort of lack of desire to become really proactive. But the other thing is it's an election year. And in an election year, you don't have people get excited about it.
I agree with Brian that there's not likely to be major tax reform, but it's a different reason. I think it's because the Trump tax cuts are so new, we don't know what they're going to do to Utah yet.
We're going to have to wrap it up right there. We'll watch these things closely. Thank you very much. That's it for tonight's show. The conversation continues online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. We'll see you next week. Thank you and good night.